I never imagined that a stupid Instagram story would be the thing that flipped my entire world upside down. It was a Tuesday. I had just woken up in my Brooklyn apartment, still half asleep, hair a mess and coffee in hand, when my phone started buzzing like it was on fire. Dozens of DMs poured in, each one more urgent than the last. I rubbed my eyes, expecting some glitch or maybe a meme going viral, but as soon as I opened the first message, my stomach twisted. There I was, screenshot after screenshot, plastered across Instagram stories from someone I had once looked up to, Mason Vance. The caption read, "Is this what genius looks like now?" The photo he used wasn't even recent. It was from a community tech meetup I attended last spring, where I had worn a color-clashing outfit and chunky handmade earrings. I liked how I looked, but in that moment, under the glare of his mockery, it felt like the whole internet was laughing. The worst part, Mason wasn't just anyone, he was the golden boy of Silicon Valley. CTO of Nexora, the startup darling riding high on VC buzz and buzzwords. His word carried weight, and now so did his ridicule. If you're hooked already, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more incredible true stories like this one. It helps us tell more stories that matter. I stood frozen in the middle of my studio apartment, surrounded by silent plants and scattered notebooks, trying to process the surreal moment. One by one, my notifications multiplied. Friends, acquaintances, even people I barely knew from online dev forums messaged me. "Are you okay? Did you see this? WTF is wrong with him?" At first I laughed nervously. Maybe he meant it as a joke. Maybe I was being too sensitive, but the more I stared, the clearer it became. This wasn't playful, it was targeted, it was cruel, and it hurt. I'd spent most of my 20s teaching myself to be okay with not fitting in. I wasn't Ivy League polished or startup trendy. I was self-taught, sometimes awkward, often intense. I liked to code at night and sew weird clothes during breaks. It made me feel balanced, whole. But Mason's post stripped that away with one swipe of smug sarcasm. Old insecurities surged like floodwater. I remembered the taunts in high school about my thrifted wardrobe, the whispers during college hackathons when I spoke up too much, the snickers at networking events when I introduced myself as freelance. Every bit of armor I'd built felt like paper in a storm. I nearly deactivated my entire online presence. What was the point? If someone like Mason could reduce me to a punchline, what chance did I have at being taken seriously? But just as I hovered over the delete account button, a ping pulled me back. Our close friend Jess sent me a message that would change everything. "Harper, have you seen the new Nexora dev tool? Something about it feels familiar." Confused, I clicked the link. It was a video demo posted on Nexora's official YouTube channel, their latest product, an interface builder they were branding as revolutionary. The narrator hyped up how clean the code was, how intuitive the structure felt, how modular it all seemed. I tilted my head. Wait, the layout of the components, the routing logic, the structure of the imports. I recognized it all, not just generally, I recognized it specifically. I grabbed my laptop, opened a tab, and pulled up my GitHub. There it was, Modular X. My open-source JavaScript framework I had quietly released 6 months earlier. It had gotten a few stars, a little traction, nothing big. But it was mine. And suddenly, the architecture in Nexora's shiny new tool felt like looking into a mirror. I rewound the video, paused, re-watched, cross-referenced their demo code with mine. Same logic patterns, same naming conventions, same component behavior. It wasn't just similar, it was mine. For a few minutes I just sat there, stunned. He had mocked my clothes, publicly humiliated me for a laugh, and then, with the same breath, built his company's next flagship product using my code. I didn't know what to do yet. My hands trembled slightly on the keyboard. The rage, the disbelief, the betrayal, they all piled on top of each other like a landslide. But under it all, something else sparked, a quiet, steely resolve. I wasn't going to disappear. I was going to find out exactly what Nexora had done, and I was going to make them answer for it. My name is Harper Lin, and I've been coding since I was 13 years old. It started with a pirated copy of Dreamweaver on a busted-up Dell in my parents' basement. I was that kid, the one who stayed in during lunch to tweak CSS, who built fan sites for obscure anime, who'd rather solve syntax errors than go to prom. I didn't fit the mold then, and I still don't now. I grew up in New Jersey, second-generation Korean American, raised by a mother who worked double shifts as a nurse and a father who ran a dry cleaning shop. They didn't understand why I spent so much time on the computer, but they didn't stop me either. And in those long, lonely nights of trial and error, I found something close to control, to clarity. Code made sense, even when nothing else did. By the time I was 20, I dropped out of NYU's computer science program. The structure choked me. Professors dismissed me. Group projects became battles. I knew how to build, but they wanted theory. So I left. I didn't have a plan. Just a portfolio of half-finished apps, some contract gigs that barely paid, and a growing list of rejections from startups that said I wasn't a culture fit. I heard that phrase so often it started to sound like a curse. Too intense, too alternative, too weird. But I kept going. I freelanced. I took odd jobs. I learned every framework I could find. React, Vue, Svelte. Each one a new challenge, a new escape. I contributed to forums under pseudonyms, wrote Medium articles that no one read, and built tools that lived in the shadows of GitHub. Then, 6 months ago, I released ModuleX. I hadn't planned for it to be a big deal. It started as a side project, just a way to modularize UI components without all the bloat. But I'd put everything into it. Days and nights fine-tuning the architecture, making it lightweight but powerful, building it so even junior devs could use it intuitively. I launched it quietly, posted about it on Reddit and Twitter, and waited. It didn't explode. A few people starred it. A few kind strangers sent feedback. It hovered in obscurity like so many of my creations, but I was proud of it. ModuleX felt like a reflection of me, clean, simple, efficient, unapologetically different. So when I saw Nexora's demo, when I saw the inner skeleton of their new dev tool, it was like déjà vu with a knife twist. The more I watched, the deeper the unease crawled through me. Their system had the same modular pattern, the same lazy load mechanism I had struggled to perfect. Even the function names felt borrowed. I knew what I was seeing. My hands, my mind, were wired to recognize this. It was my blueprint, slightly altered, dressed in corporate polish, but undeniably mine. And the irony, the brutal, mocking irony. While Mason Vance, the man who had ridiculed my appearance to hundreds of thousands of followers, was standing on a virtual stage praising innovation, he was standing on the back of the very thing I had built. I slammed my laptop shut that night and didn't sleep. My brain was spinning in circles, dragging me back through every memory of rejection, every panel I was never invited to, every idea I'd had that was overlooked, until someone with a better smile or sharper suit said it louder. I remembered sitting at a tech conference 2 years ago watching Mason speak. I'd been in the second row taking notes. I'd even complimented him afterwards, hoping for a conversation. He had barely looked at me, just nodded, mumbled something about interesting perspective, and walked off. Back then I told myself it was fine, that I wasn't polished enough yet, that my work needed to be better. But now I saw it clearly. It was never about the work. It was about visibility, access, who gets credit, who gets heard. I opened ModuleX again, scanned the repo, and then looked back at Nexora's documentation. The overlap was glaring. Not just design philosophy, actual implementation. I started taking notes, drawing parallels. I didn't know yet what I was going to do with them, but I knew I couldn't look away. There's something visceral about having your voice stolen. When you're already fighting to be seen, to be taken seriously, to have someone mock your identity while profiting off your intellect, it cuts deeper than anyone imagines. And somewhere, under the exhaustion and anger, I felt something else bubbling up. Not fear, not even revenge, just clarity. The kind that comes when the fog lifts and you realize that everything you've endured, every dismissal, every insult, has prepared you for this exact moment. I didn't know how far this would go. I didn't know who would listen. But I was done being silent. And I was done being invisible. Once I started digging, I couldn't stop. It was like staring into the edge of a bottomless pit. The deeper I went, the more twisted it became. I started by downloading everything I could from Nexora's public documentation. I watched their product launch 3 more times, pausing every few seconds, taking detailed notes. I searched for developer interviews, changelogs, and any technical material related to their new UI builder. The similarities to Module X were no longer just unnerving. They were undeniable. Their component structure followed the same lazy initialization logic I'd developed. The naming conventions, init block, load module, sync view, they weren't just similar. They were identical. The routing behavior mimicked the lightweight transition engine I had written myself. Even their error messages were structured the same way, not word for word, but eerily close. I checked the timestamps. My Module X repo had been published first, by months. That should have made me feel vindicated. Instead, I felt nauseous. Nexora had taken my work, rebranded it, glossed it up. And now they were pitching it to investors as internally developed proprietary technology. But I needed more than my gut feeling. I needed proof. Cold, hard, technical proof. I pulled out every tool in my stack, hash checkers, source map analyzers, minified bundle diff tools. I compared their codebase line by line with mine. Even with their obfuscation and build compression, I started finding patterns, consistent hashes in component logic. One of my private helper functions, wrap in safe boundary, showed up deep in their documentation under the exact same name. They hadn't even bothered to rename it. That was the moment I realized this wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't even sloppiness. It was theft, plain and simple. And they thought no one would notice. I copied everything. Screenshots, code diffs, architecture maps, commit logs. I created a private folder and labeled it for later. I didn't know what later would be, but something inside me whispered, "You'll need this." Still, doubt crept in. What if I was overreacting? What if I was just seeing what I wanted to see? I needed a second pair of eyes. So I called Rena. Rena Cho had been my best friend since our community college days. She was now working at a small tech law firm downtown. If there was anyone I trusted to tell me if I was being paranoid, it was her. When I showed her the documents, she didn't say anything for a long time. She scrolled, tapped, read the code comparisons twice. Finally, she looked at me and said, "Harper, this isn't a maybe. They stole your work." She leaned back, crossed her arms, and added, "And you better not let them get away with it." Her confidence gave me something I hadn't felt in days: solid ground. We spent the next 2 hours outlining what I'd need to prepare if I wanted to confront them. Rena walked me through the basics. Keep records of everything, don't engage publicly just yet, and whatever happens, don't delete the repo. "You hold the timestamp," she said. "That's your armor." That night, I couldn't sleep again. But this time, it wasn't anxiety keeping me awake. It was the pulse of something different: conviction. My brain ticked through every detail like a machine revving to life. I didn't know what I'd do next, but I knew I couldn't walk away. I opened my journal, the one I barely touched anymore, and scribbled a single line. "They don't get to mock me and steal from me." I meant it. The next morning I woke to 3 more messages from devs I'd met over the years. Each had seen the Nexora launch and reached out saying, "Didn't you build something like this?" One even said, "It's basically your framework, right?" The confirmation from others gave me momentum. I wasn't alone. I wasn't imagining it. But I also knew I was stepping into a world where Mason Vance held all the cards. His company had legal teams, PR strategists, and powerful friends. I had a laptop, a few screenshots, and a slowly simmering fury. Still, that was enough for now, because if there's one thing I'd learned from years of being overlooked, it's that underestimated people are the ones you should fear the most. They pay attention, they remember, and they build things you can't take credit for forever. I wasn't rushing into war. I was preparing for one. The first step was making sure I had everything backed up, twice: local drive, cloud folder, encrypted archive, every line of code, every screenshot comparison, every time-stamped commit. Rena had drilled it into me. If this goes public, they'll push back hard. Don't give them room to question the facts. Next came the deeper dive. Nexora's documentation had changed slightly since launch, likely to cover their tracks, but I'd already archived the original site using a web crawler. I pulled up the snapshots and compared them to my repo again, finding even more overlap in how they handled their internal caching layer. It was practically a clone of Modulex's memo store logic. They hadn't even rewritten the error handling, just rephrased the console warnings. It was bold, sloppy, arrogant, and it pissed me off. Still, I knew outrage wasn't a strategy. I needed airtight evidence. I started running a series of diffs and hash tests to highlight matching code structures. Even with obfuscation, I isolated identical functional patterns, enough to satisfy not just devs but potential legal observers too. Rena helped translate my findings into language that a non-coder could understand. "Think of it as a before and after cheat sheet," she said. "If this ever becomes a legal fight, we need to show the theft in plain English." That's when I found something I hadn't expected. While scrolling through old dev community threads, I came across a post from a user named DevNox asking technical questions about dynamic module injection, specifically the kind I used in Modula X. I clicked through their post history and realized they'd been unusually active in the months after I released my repo. Then I saw it, a comment thread where DevNox linked directly to Modula X, saying, "Interesting structure. Could definitely be adapted to fit scalable UI tooling." I clicked their profile. Guess who they followed? Mason Vance. It wasn't proof of anything on its own, but it hinted at how early the company had been sniffing around my work. The real turning point came a few days later, when Rena called and said, "You need to see this." She'd found screenshots posted anonymously on an internal tech gossip forum, a leak from someone claiming to work at Nexora. The thread wasn't public for long, but it included what appeared to be a snippet of Slack messages between Mason and a lead engineer. The message read, "We're not using her name. It's open source. Just build it cleaner." Her, not the author, not the repo, just her. That word made my blood boil. They knew. They'd seen me, known who I was, and still chose to erase me. That changed everything. I stared at the screen for a long time, the words sinking in like a stone in water. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't some lazy intern cutting corners. This was calculated, strategic, disrespectful. They'd taken what I'd built, laughed at my appearance, and tried to vanish me from my own creation. I wasn't letting them, but I also wasn't walking blind into a battle I couldn't win. Mason had lawyers, investors, and years of media charm. If I went public without preparation, he'd spin the narrative, call it a coincidence, accuse me of seeking attention. So I decided to give him a chance, not because he deserved it, but because I wanted it documented. I drafted a message in my notes app, then deleted it, then rewrote it again. Finally, I kept it simple. "Hi, Mason. I think we need to talk about Nexora's new product and my code." I stared at the words for a moment, then I hit send. No threats, no rage, just truth. I wasn't expecting a reply, at least not quickly, but less than an hour later, I saw the typing bubble pop up. "Happy to chat. Want to hop on a quick call tomorrow." That was it. No apology, no context, but it was a start. I set up a Zoom link for noon the next day, my heart pounding harder than I wanted to admit. This was no longer just about stolen code or a mean Instagram story. This was about power, about voice, about standing in front of someone who tried to reduce me to nothing and refusing to back down. I didn't know what he'd say, I didn't know how far he'd try to twist it, but I knew one thing. I'd be ready. The next day, just before noon, I sat in front of my laptop, heart pounding like it was trying to escape my chest. The Zoom link I'd sent was open. I checked my notes again. Clear bullet points, evidence ready to share. I had backups of everything on a drive next to me just in case. I wasn't going in to yell. I was going in to show him the truth he thought I'd never be bold enough to confront. At exactly 12 Cs, Mason Vance joined the call. There he was, crisp shirt, AirPods in, hair perfectly messy in that practiced way. He looked exactly like he did in his tech talks and media appearances. Polished, confident, detached. "Hey," he said casually, like we were two devs catching up after a conference. I forced myself to meet his gaze. "Thanks for making time." "No problem," he replied. "Saw your message. Not quite sure what it's about, but let's talk." A lie, right out the gate. I opened the call calmly. "I've been reviewing Nexora's new UI builder, and I couldn't help but notice something familiar about it." He smiled. "Familiar how?" I clicked share screen and pulled up my side-by-side comparison of Modular X and Nexora's product. No commentary, just code, block for block, variable names, component behavior, the structure of the framework. For the first 10 seconds, he didn't say a word. Then came the shift. He leaned back, lips tightening just slightly. "Look, Harper," he said, "I see where this is going. But you do know your framework was open source, right?" "Yes," I replied. "And open source means available, not free to plagiarize without credit. You didn't fork it. You didn't even reference it. You presented it as proprietary. Your CTO speech called it built from scratch." He exhaled. "Well, maybe there were influences. I mean, it's not uncommon. Engineers draw from lots of sources. Happens all the time. I'm not talking about influence, I'm talking about function-for-function replication, with internal logic down to naming patterns. This wasn't inspiration, it was appropriation." He raised an eyebrow. "So what exactly do you want here?" There it was, the pivot, not denial, defense. I answered him clearly. "I want acknowledgement. A public statement from Nexora that Modular X was the foundation for your builder, a GitHub credit, and a commitment to transparency with your investors and users." He laughed, a short, condescending puff. "You're serious?" I didn't flinch. "Dead serious." He shook his head. "Harper, come on. This is how the industry works. You publish something open source, you're saying have at it. If we improved it, optimized it, made it scalable, that's innovation. You mocked me publicly," I said, voice sharpening, "and then you built your product on my back. Don't talk to me about innovation." That stopped him. He blinked. "What are you talking about?" I pulled up the screenshot from his Instagram story, my face, my outfit. His caption, "Is this what genius looks like now?" The smugness drained from his expression. He paused, eyes narrowing. "That wasn't personal, it was just a joke." "Right, a joke, about someone whose code you were already using." He looked away, jaw clenching for a second. I let the silence hang. Then I said, "You have 72 hours. After that I go public. With the evidence. With everything." His eyes returned to mine, cold now, calculating. "You do that," he said slowly, "and it'll get ugly. I have lawyers. PR. You think the internet will care?" "I don't care if they care," I said. "I care if they see." He leaned forward again, voice lower. "You want to burn this down for a few lines of code?" "No," I said. "I want credit. That's it." Another pause. Then he smiled, tight, professional. "I'll get back to you." The call ended a few seconds later. I stared at the black screen. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from adrenaline, from rage, and from something else too, a sense of power I hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time he'd seen me, maybe not with respect, but with fear. And that, for now, was enough. The first hour after the call I waited, then another. By the end of the day there was nothing, no email, no message, not even a passive-aggressive tweet. Mason had gone silent. At first, I thought it was a delay tactic. Maybe he was consulting his lawyers, crafting a sanitized apology, preparing some PR-friendly statement. But deep down, I already knew the truth. He wasn't going to do anything. He was betting I wouldn't either, so I called Rena. "He's bluffing," she said immediately. "That's why he's stalling. He thinks you're too small to be a threat." "I'm not," I replied. "Then prove it." That night, we sat on a shared Google Doc, piecing together everything. Not just code comparisons, but narrative, context, a full timeline. My original repo, the date of publication, screenshots of every matching feature, and the Slack leak from the internal thread. We wrote it all out, fact by fact, timestamp by timestamp. I wasn't writing a rant, I was building a case. By sunrise, it was done. I uploaded the expose to Medium under my real name, how Nexora used my code and tried to erase me. Then I pinned a tweet with a thread breaking down the highlights, linking to the article, tagging no one, making no accusations, just presenting the truth. Then I waited. I didn't wait long. Within the first hour, the post was retweeted by a small group of indie developers I'd collaborated with over the years. Then it hit Reddit's R-programming. Then Hacker News. By noon, my mentions were flooded. Comments poured in. This is theft. How does this keep happening? I use Modular X every day, can't believe this. A few users tagged Nexora directly. One even started a GitHub repo dedicated to preserving open source credit. It was overwhelming. I had gone from being mocked for my outfit to being at the center of a firestorm about developer ethics. Strangers from countries I'd never visited were defending me. Screenshots of Modular X were going viral. Someone made a meme comparing Mason's silence to the "this is fine" dog in the burning room. By the end of the day, I was trending. Then finally, Nexora responded. A tweet, 3 sentences. We value the open source community and are reviewing recent concerns regarding code similarities in our UI builder. We take attribution seriously and are investigating internally. No apology, no credit, just corporate speak soaked in fear. But it was too late. The narrative was out. And it wasn't theirs. Journalists began reaching out. A reporter from a tech news site DM'd me asking for an interview. A small podcast invited me to talk about code ownership. Even developers who had ignored me before were now amplifying my voice. Rena called and said, "You've done it, they're on the defensive." And yet beneath the adrenaline, I felt strange. I wasn't gloating. I wasn't celebrating. I was exhausted. Because the truth is, I never wanted to fight. I just wanted to build something beautiful and have it recognized. I wanted to contribute to a world I loved, to feel like I belonged in it, not just tolerated, but respected. Instead, I had to shout to be heard. Still, something inside me had shifted. I wasn't the person who had wavered in front of the delete button anymore. I was someone who could stand against a corporation and make it shake. Someone who turned mockery into momentum. But I also knew this wasn't over. Nexora had issued a vague statement. Mason had vanished from his own platforms, and while the internet raged in my defense today, it could forget by next week. So I kept receipts. I archived every article, every tweet, every supportive thread. I took screenshots, saved links, and updated my folder labeled "For Later." Because if they thought a 3-sentence tweet would make me disappear, they still hadn't learned who I was. I wasn't here for 15 minutes of outrage. I was here for justice, and I wasn't going anywhere. By the end of the week, it was everywhere. TechCrunch picked up the story first, then Wired. Then The Verge ran a headline that read, "Open source dev calls out Nexora for stealing code and the internet's backing her." I didn't even have time to process it all. My inbox was flooded with interview requests, podcast invitations, legal inquiries, support from dev communities I'd never even heard of. Some wanted to praise me. Some wanted to debate me. Some just wanted to say thank you. I kept my responses short, factual. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I wasn't angling for fame. I was just tired. But I also knew I couldn't afford to stop now. Every day brought more visibility. One thread in particular went viral, a breakdown by a senior engineer at a competing company, explaining in plain terms how Modular X was the bones of Nexora's UI builder. It was the kind of technical validation no PR statement could undo. The hashtag #CreditHarper started trending. Developers began adding it to their bios. A few even forked Modular X to contribute improvements and offered to help me scale it. For the first time, people were treating my code like it mattered, like I mattered. Meanwhile, things weren't looking so polished over at Nexora. Their investors started asking questions. A well-known VC tweeted that the situation was concerning and called for greater respect for the open source ecosystem. Another one, more bluntly, wrote, "You don't build billion-dollar platforms on stolen code. Full stop." I didn't have access to Nexora's internal channels, but you could feel the panic leaking out. A reporter sent me a screenshot of an internal memo from the company's legal team advising all staff to avoid commenting on the issue publicly. Someone else anonymously forwarded me an internal calendar showing emergency meetings with the board. Rumors swirled. Some said Mason had been benched, others claimed resignations were coming. And through it all, I kept building. Not out of spite, but because the noise had finally cleared space for the one thing I'd always wanted, the freedom to create without being ignored. People started reaching out to collaborate. Designers, writers, startup founders. They didn't want to fix me or refactor my personality. They wanted what I had to offer, exactly as I was, but I'd be lying if I said I felt only pride. There was grief too. Grief for all the years I spent wondering if I was invisible because I deserved to be. Grief for every idea I had to bury just to survive another client meeting. Grief for the version of me that thought maybe if I dressed better, spoke softer, I'd finally be invited in. Now they couldn't unsee me. They couldn't unmock what they'd tried to erase. The attention, however, wasn't all positive. I received DMs telling me I'd ruined people's jobs, that I should have handled it privately, that I was just bitter. Some even suggested I'd faked the code to stir drama, but none of them could unwrite the commit history. The truth was baked into every line of logic I'd published before Nexora ever typed a single key. What surprised me most were the thank you messages from other developers, especially women and people of color, who said things like, "You gave me courage to release my own project. I thought no one would care if my work was taken. You proved otherwise. You reminded me we belong here." Those hit the hardest, because that's what this was always about. Not revenge, recognition. I didn't want to watch Mason fall. I wanted to rise, and I finally had. I gave another short interview, this time for a YouTube channel run by two indie devs. They asked me how it felt to go from being mocked to being vindicated. I paused before answering. "It doesn't feel like a win," I said. "It feels like something that should have never happened. But now that it did, maybe it won't happen as easily to someone else." The comments were full of support. A few mentioned how Mason still hadn't made a personal statement. Others wondered if Nexora could recover from the blow. I didn't care. That part wasn't mine to fix. I had done what I came to do, and now the tech world was watching, not because of a viral post, not because of a scandal, but because finally they had no choice. Rebuilding didn't feel like starting over. It felt like finally starting from where I should have been all along. The offers started coming quickly. A VC firm in Chicago reached out, offering to fund Modulex as a standalone platform. 2 tech incubators invited me to join their programs. A handful of companies even asked if I'd consider becoming their lead architect. I turned most of them down. What I wanted wasn't to be absorbed by someone else's vision. I wanted space to build mine. So I did. With the help of a few contributors from the open source community, I began transforming Modulex into something bigger, an actual product suite. I hired a designer named Jules, who had DM'd me with a sleek prototype sketch. She said, "I believe in tools built by outsiders for outsiders." We met for coffee the next day, and by the end of the week, she was on the team. I also brought in a developer named Theo, who had been contributing pull requests from Berlin even before the controversy. "Modulex helped me land my first job," he wrote. "It's an honor to give back." And just like that, what began as a solo side project was becoming a team, a movement. We set weekly sprints. We held stand-ups. We built a real roadmap, not just for coders, but for anyone who'd ever felt sidelined by complex frameworks and elitist gatekeeping. Our mission was clear: to make tech that didn't require permission. The feedback was incredible. Teachers emailed saying they were using our code to help students learn modular design. A non-profit in South Africa reached out, asking if they could adapt our builder for educational apps. We said yes to all of it. Something else started happening too. People began telling their own stories, Not just about stolen code, but about invisibility, about being the only one in the room, about staying silent because they were scared of losing everything. I listened, and I created space for them. I launched a mentoring circle, a simple virtual meetup where developers could share their projects, ask questions, and get support. We didn't care about resumes or job titles, just effort and honesty. We called it the Quiet Ones. It filled up within 2 days. We met every Thursday night, across time zones, trading ideas and encouragement. It was chaotic, beautiful, real. For some of us, it was the first time we'd spoken about code without fear of judgment. I realized something then. Visibility wasn't just about being seen. It was about helping others feel seen too. And maybe that was what had been missing from the start. The fame didn't matter. The press coverage was nice, but it would fade. What wouldn't fade was the network we were building, the people we were lifting, the freedom we were creating. I started showing up differently too. I stopped softening my voice in meetings. I wore whatever I wanted. Whether it was clashing colors or handmade earrings, I posted selfies next to commits. I stopped apologizing. I'd spent too long trying to be what I thought they'd accept. Now I was just me, fully, loudly, unfiltered, and that was enough. Then one night, as I was cleaning up pull requests, I got a message. It was from someone using a Nexora company email, just a first name. Dylan. Hi Harper, I'm a junior dev at Nexora. I saw everything. I've been meaning to write you. I paused, unsure what to feel. He continued. I joined Nexora 2 months before the UI Builder launched. I didn't know where the code came from at first, but later I found your repo. I spoke up once. Got told to focus on execution. I'm sorry. You were right. If there's anything I can do to help, let me know. I stared at his words for a while, not because I didn't believe him, but because for the first time someone on the inside was saying it out loud. I didn't reply right away. I needed to think. But his message stayed with me. It reminded me that this wasn't just about theft. It was about silence, the kind that festers inside companies and communities when no one dares to speak. But the silence was breaking now, and we weren't going back. I didn't expect Dylan to follow up. Most people don't, especially when it comes to whistleblowing. But 3 days after his first message, I got a second one. This time, it included attachments, screenshots, internal emails, snippets of Slack threads. Some of it I recognized, conversations between senior engineers casually referencing Module X by name. But some of it was new and devastating. In one thread, dated a month before Nexora's product launch, a lead dev wrote, "We're going to have to rewrite the metadata parser or it's going to scream Module X." Another, "Just strip her name out. Open source is open game." And then, from Mason himself, "Push the launch, add layers if you have to. I don't want anyone connecting the dots yet." There it was. Proof not just of stolen code, but of intent, of deliberate, calculated theft, of active concealment. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen in disbelief. I wasn't even angry at first, just stunned. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't sloppiness. It was premeditated. I forwarded the files to Rena. She called me immediately. "This changes everything," she said. "They didn't just borrow your work. They tried to erase you on purpose. This is legal territory now." "Do we go to court?" I asked. "Maybe," she replied. "But first, you should go to the public again, with this." I hesitated. It wasn't fear this time. It was responsibility. If I published this, things would escalate fast. Jobs could be lost, reputations destroyed. And yet I knew what they had done to me, and what they were willing to keep doing to others was worse. So I did what I always do when the path isn't clear. I reached out to the community. I posted a short update on X. A developer at Nexora came forward. What they shared confirms what many of us feared. The theft was intentional. "I'll be posting an update soon, with their permission." The post blew up. And then something incredible happened. Other devs started speaking out too, not just about Nexora, but about other companies, other projects, other stolen ideas. A small wave became a flood. People tagged each other, shared stories, launched threads. It was like the dam had finally broken. I didn't publish the internal files myself. I gave them, with Dylan's consent, to a tech journalist I trusted, someone who had covered the story from the start. She verified the evidence, interviewed Dylan under anonymity, and released a full exposé titled Inside Nexora: How One Startup Silenced a Creator and Stole Her Code. It landed like a meteor. Within hours, Nexora's board announced a third-party investigation. Their lead engineer deleted his account. Stockholders started distancing themselves. The silence that once surrounded the company was replaced by chaos. And I kept going. The Modular X site saw a traffic spike we weren't ready for. Theo scaled our servers in a panic. Jules redesigned the landing page to make it easier to navigate. Users poured in from every continent. We crossed 100,000 downloads by the end of the week. But this wasn't just about my project anymore. The conversation had shifted. On dev forums, people asked how we could better protect open source work. On LinkedIn, companies pledged to credit contributors. Even GitHub released a blog post addressing attribution practices. Change was happening. Slow, imperfect, but real. And just when I thought it was over, I got an email. From Mason, short, formal, tense. Harper, I acknowledge the decisions made at Nexora were wrong. I take full responsibility. I've stepped down as CTO. I apologize for the harm caused. I'm available if you wish to speak. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. Sometimes, silence is the only answer someone deserves. I closed my inbox and opened my IDE. There was still work to do. A few weeks later, I visited my old apartment in Brooklyn, the one where Modular X was born, where the light never quite reached the kitchen, where I coded through winters wrapped in 2 sweaters and a space heater, where I doubted myself almost every day, but still pushed every commit. Standing in that cramped space again, I remembered the silence, the long hours, the version of me who had no audience, no recognition, just the work. That version built something honest, something real, and she never gave up. I smiled. Because everything that came after, every retweet, every article, every confrontation, had only confirmed what I already knew in my bones. My work had always been worthy. The world had just been slow to catch up. Now things felt different. I didn't feel small anymore. I felt certain. Modular X had become more than code. It was a symbol now, for creators who don't wait to be chosen, for ideas too raw for corporate polish, for anyone who's been told they don't belong in tech. We kept growing the platform. New features, new contributors, even a small grant from a non-profit supporting underrepresented founders. Jules and Theo became more than teammates. They became my closest collaborators, creative anchors who believed in the mission as much as I did. And the quiet ones. It exploded. We went from 10 people in a Zoom room to over 500 active members across the world. Some just listened, others shared their own code. A few even launched projects built entirely inside our support network. Every time I saw someone post "shipped my first repo thanks to this group," it hit me all over again. Visibility isn't a spotlight, it's a chain reaction. You help one voice rise, and that voice lifts another, and then another. That's the world I want to build. That's the world I'm building now. I still get asked about Mason sometimes. People want to know what happened to him, what I'd say if I saw him again. The truth, nothing. I don't think about him. I don't need to. Because my story was never about him. It was about the decision I made the day he tried to humiliate me, to stay visible, to stay loud, to stay mine. I think about that often, how close I came to disappearing. How close I was to erasing myself from the internet out of shame. But I didn't. I stayed. And because I stayed, the world had to see me. So, to anyone listening now, anyone who's ever been mocked, overlooked, silenced, or dismissed, I hope you hear this. They don't get to define your worth, you do, and your voice, it matters more than you think. If you followed my journey this far, thank you. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful real-life stories like this one. And if you want to hear the next unbelievable twist that followed this saga, click the video on your screen right now, because this was only the beginning.